Flash CS4 has remarkable motion graphics potential, and I'll show you how I did this little cat graphic. My cat graphic's only about 4 or 5 seconds long, but in doing it, you have to understand all the new features of the motion tween and motion presets. We're going to open up a new Flash file. It should be an ActionScript 3.0 file. And then we're going to go to Modify, Document, and make sure that the dimensions are 960 pixels by 720 pixels, which is a good size for the internet. Get the text tool, type the word cat. From the property inspector, pick the font you want, the size, color, all that sort of thing, and position it where you want it to end up being on the stage. Select it with the black arrow tool, go to Modify, Break Apart. Then go to Modify, Timeline, Distribute to Layers. This will make each letter of the word cat have its own layer. Go out to frame 15, select the frames for the C layer, A layer, and T layer under frame 15. Right-click on any one of those selected frames and go to Insert Frame. Then right-click and go to Create Motion Tween. Your layers now have motion tween spans. A little trick to have property keyframes in the same position as on frame 1 is while those spans are selected, hit the up arrow and the down arrow on your keyboard. That will move the letters C, A, and T up 1 pixel and then back 1 pixel. So they'll end up in exactly where they started, but by moving them, you get a new property keyframe. In order to be able to access all the great possibilities of motion tweening, it's better if your letters are not just letters but symbols. So right-click on your C and go to Convert to Symbol. You could give it the name Symbol C, which will make it easier to identify it in the library. We're going to do the same thing for the A and the T. So you'll notice in your library you have a symbol A, a symbol C, and a symbol T. We're then going to go Insert Frames for the C layer, A layer, and T layer on frame 45. We'll then do the up arrow, down arrow trick to establish property keyframes on frame 45. What you have now is on frame 1, 15, and 45, you have the letters C, A, and T, and they're all in exactly the same position. And now finally, we're going to do the same thing on frame 60. We're going to insert frames and then the up and down arrow to make new property keyframes. So now our spans are divided into 3 parts. There's a part that goes from frame 1 to 15, and then from 16 to 44, and then 45 to 60. We're going to actually split these spans into separate sections. Let's go to frame 16. In order to highlight simply one frame, with your Macintosh, hold the Command key down and click on frame 16 of the C layer. That will highlight only that one frame. Now right-click on that highlighted frame and go to Split Motion. Then go to frame 46, Command-click on that frame of the C layer, and then right-click and go to Split Motion. Now go back to frame 1 on your timeline, and you're going to drag the C, the A, and the T off the stage. On the timeline, where the numbers are, there's a red playhead. You can drag that along those numbers. This is a technique known as scrubbing. And I've scrubbed over to frame 8 and notice where the letters are. So in frame 1, they'll be off the stage. On frame 15, they'll be together. And as we scrub between 1 and 15, we'll see them coming together. Here we are in frame 15, and you see the letters are indeed together. Select your C and make sure you're back on frame 1. And then open your motion editor. The motion editor gives you enormous control over various movement techniques. The first thing I recommend that you do, though, is to go to the bottom of the motion editor, and you're going to drag the bottom right number as far to the right as you can. In this case, I've done that, and it's that little 15. This way, it's going to show all 15 frames of this motion span. The basic way the motion editor works is you position the playhead on the frame where you may want to alter the look of the object. In this case, we're on frame 1. We have the C selected, and I went to scale X and typed in 200. So now the C is twice as big as it originally was. Notice to the right of that 200 is a little link icon. I have mine set to link so that as I make the scale X get bigger, the scale Y will also get bigger. You can unlink those and do them individually. So for instance, if I just wanted it to start out wide and then get normal, I could break the link and just deal with the scale X individually. Now I've scrubbed over to frame 15, and I'm going to make the scale X property back to 100%. The C is going to be big to begin with, but as it flies into its final position, it will get back to a normal size. Let's scrub back to 1, and we'll try another effect, which is the color effects. We're going to use alpha. By the way, if you recall, I told you that we had to make our letters into symbols. If we had not done that, if we had just left the C just a normal C, we wouldn't be able to access color effects. We're going to click the plus sign for the color effect and then select alpha. Then slide the alpha amount down to 0. Now you won't be able to see your C at this point. Let's slide back over to 15 and set the alpha back to 100%. Now what's going to happen is you're going to have this large C that floats in, starting out invisible and gradually becomes normal size plus 100% opaque. Another really cool effect is the blur effect. So let's go back to frame 1 and let's put a blur on. Sometimes when things move, if they blur, it gives that kind of motion blur effect that looks so very, very cool. I'm going to click plus for filter and add a blur and make the blur 35 pixels. Notice I have both the blur X and blur Y linked, so they'll both blur equally. Then we're going to slide back to frame 15 and set the blur back to 0. So we'll get this big C that's 0% opaque and very blurry. And as it moves on to the stage, it's going to get smaller, more opaque, and less blurry. So that by the time it gets to frame 15, it'll just look like a wonderful C. As I'm scrubbing here, I'm on frame 8, I guess, and you'll see that the A and the C are both kind of getting into their final position. I basically did the same thing I did to the C for the A and the T. I originally had the second span of motion frames going from 15 to 45. That's 30 frames, and that's about a second. Let's say I wanted to have the part where you can read the word last a little longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that last edge of the final motion span out to 120. I'm going to do that for the C, the A, and the T. Now to lengthen the middle span, I'm going to get the vertical line between the end of the second span and the beginning of the third span and just drag that line over to 110. And I'm going to do that for the C span, the A span, and the T span. Now I have a much longer part of my presentation that will be more or less a still image of the word cat, so the user can read it for a little bit longer. Now I'm going to go to the last span of the C and select it and go up to Window and select Motion Presets. There are some pre-built motion paths that we can use that are pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and open up the default preset folder, and I'm going to put the fly out right on the C. It'll warn me and ask me if indeed I do want to do this, and you just say yes. So I'm just going to use a fly out left, a right, and a top. So each letter will be flying out in a different direction. Now what we have now is from 1 to 15, they fly in. From 15 to 110, they stay put, and then from 110 to 133 or so, they go away.